Tariffs, an extremely brief history. The history of economic freedom and political freedom, it's all about tariffs. So the way things used to work, and I don't mean in the 2010s, I mean like 250 years ago, is that the king would run a nation's economy. Tariffs were absolutely key to this. If the king needed more revenue, that was relatively easy. He could declare a new tariff on something that came from outside the kingdom's borders. If you wanted to cross the border, if you wanted to unload your ship's foreign merchandise at the warehouse, you had to pay into the king's treasury. It had always been thus. Merchants understood their place in society. They wanted to make a living. They didn't have much say about the imposition of tariffs. They did what they were told, and they paid what they must. Of course, smuggling and piracy existed at the gray and black markets to circumvent these tariffs. Every tax causes an inevitable tax avoidant behavior, whether legal or illegal. And maybe if you were a duke or the king's favorite, for some reason, you could get monopoly rights to exploit the guano trade in the South Pacific or the tea plantations of Ceylon. But everybody knew their place. What are you going to do? It's mercantilism, and you're a merchant. He's the king, and he tells you what to pay. He determines who gets to do what business. Doing business would mean a constant game of please, king, may I. And then comes the revolution of 1776. In 1776, Adam Smith published The Wealth of Nations. If we remember anything about the book, we vaguely understand this as the original text of the capitalist revolution. Suddenly, we have a Scottish philosopher explaining why, if the king and his ministers and customs agents would just get the hell out of the way, then the people would end up a whole lot richer. When the king and his ministers and the customs officers imposed their tariffs and monopolies and forced everyone to come begging for a royalty granted concession to trade, the crown got wealthy, along with the chosen aristocrats, but the merchants and the people stayed poor. Smith's revolutionary idea is that independent merchants, providers of goods and services, could produce an extraordinary abundance without the king's interference. In fact, the less the king interfered, the better. This was one of the cheekiest ideas in human history, that power and responsibility could be devolved away from the crown and his customs officers and down to the merchants. Smith argued that we should move toward the self-determination of the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker, rather than the determination of His Royal Highness. This self-determination went by another name in Smith's famous description. This was the invisible hand of the market. That very specific hand running the economy was not the king's hand. The king had to get his hand out of the economy, and it really meant a revolutionary shift in power, downward toward the people and away from the king. The other revolution of 1776, the one an ocean away from Scotland, you may remember as also being about self-determination. But make no mistake, the spark for that revolution of self-determination was tariffs. The king needed money, and the king decided that a tariff in the form of mandatory stamps on mercantile trade coming into the American colonies would do the trick. The merchants and customers of Boston, feeling sassy, decided to revolt against these new tariffs. Attacking the sovereign's ability to unilaterally impose tariffs imposed to the clear detriment of both merchants and consumers, was a way to achieve self-determination. Taxation without representation neatly captures the idea that economic freedom equals political freedom, and the converse, economic repression equals political repression. There is a 250-year historical link in the United States' conception of itself, this idea that political freedom and economic freedom go together. If the king can impose trade-crushing taxes on us, then we are in a very fundamental sense unfree. Tariffs seem like an economic idea and an economic imposition, but they are very much a reflection of political power and political freedom. This idea is as American as it gets. The year 1776 was a great one for big ideas. So what about 19th century liberalism? The fight between the king's prerogative to impose tariffs and the merchant's interest in limiting tariffs raged throughout the 19th century. By no means did the merchants win a series of one-way battles. The king and the national tradition of customs tariffs were just too powerful to do away with in less than a century. Liberalism in that era meant limiting the sovereign's power in many directions. One was through strengthening representative parliaments at the expense of the aristocracy. Liberalizing trade policy also helped to shift power downward toward the merchants. The Economist magazine is a contemporary intellectual institution that proudly traces its roots back to this fight. So, founded in 1843 by another Scottish economist, it has always explicitly linked the complementary ideas of economic liberalism with political liberalism. The idea is that a limited government allows for more space to thrive financially as well as politically. The founding fight of the Economist was against the British Corn Laws, which were, you guessed it, import tariffs. By blocking the importation of foreign grown corn, landholders in Britain could and would charge high rates for domestically grown corn and keep bread prices high. That was great for the landed aristocracy and terrible for everyone else. With the Great Depression and beyond, although the United States chose to impose a series of tariffs following the crash of 1929, these are universally viewed as harmful to both US interests and the interests of European countries in the 1930s. Following the Depression and World War II, a strong feature of Pax Americana was a slowly liberalizing trade regime under the hegemonic defense umbrella of the United States. The basic theory was the US would keep the shipping lanes open and the wars to a minimum, and the merchants would grow their trade and prosper. The government would stay in its lane, so to speak, and the goods and capital would flow and increase. So now to tariffs in 2025. Among the drastic breaks with post-World War II orthodoxy in 2025 is the blowing up of this basic compact. Precisely, zero serious economists believe the high tariff regime of the Trump administration is a good idea. The Trump administration seems inconsistently willing to stick to what it announces it will do, so we don't yet have enough data on the effect of actually imposed tariffs. As of this post in late April 2025, we have yet to see the price jumps or the scarcity in the supply chain or on the shelves that economists expect will follow an actually imposed tariff regime. Most of the focus from economists and market watchers has been on the expected effects on inflation, supply chain, and public markets. I don't have much to add there. They're all important economic and financial factors to watch. My main thought is that this is part of a long tradition of struggle about where power lies. Can the king unilaterally impose tariffs? Do the merchants throw up their hands and fold? Do consumers just have to grin and bear it? Will American consumers be okay with paying 50% more next month for stuff at Walmart and Target? Are American businesses to go, hat in hand, to the king to ask for a concession? Beyond the pure financial implications, is that kind of power dynamic in the system what we want? Is it what we can tolerate? We've been fighting about these ideas for a long time. If the consequences of the tariffs start to hit, I don't think the biggest impact will be in the financial markets. It will renew a massive struggle for power, one with unpredictable consequences for the king.